So today, we're going to dive into something pretty fascinating. It's a really practical approach to ungrading that's actually being used in a university course right now. We're going to break down how this idea moves from just, an abstract theory into a real, working system. Okay, let's get into it. But first, I want you to do something for me. Just take a second, think back to your time as a student. What is your most powerful, most memorable moment that has to do with getting a grade? Was it a good feeling, or maybe not so much? What you're looking at here are real answers to that exact question, and the range is just incredible. I mean, you see everything from the pure pain of getting a 2 out of 13 on a 7th grade math test, to the frustration of being accused of plagiarism, and on the flip side, the simple joy of a professor writing an uplifting message. Feel free to hit pause and read a few of these. They really capture the huge emotional weight of traditional grading, and it's exactly this complex experience that has so many educators looking for a better way. And that leads us right into the core philosophy of what we're talking about today. It's all about a fundamental shift in focus, moving away from the grade itself and putting the entire process squarely on learning.
So, the specific method we're looking at is called course goal setting and final grade justification. And the concept is actually pretty simple. At the very beginning of the course, students set their own personal learning goals. Then, at the very end, they're the ones who present the evidence to justify the final grade they believe they've earned.
This quote from educator Johanna Brown really gets to the heart of it all. We are not going to play the game of school. It's this powerful statement about changing the whole dynamic, moving away from just chasing points to actually pursuing real, genuine understanding. Now, for this to actually work, the instructors who designed this course say you have to start with 3 core beliefs. First, you have to believe that every single student is capable of achieving mastery. Second, the course needs to be flexible enough for students to chase their own interests. And third, the real goal isn't just about teaching content. It's about fostering student learning and their own personal development.
Okay, so that's the big idea, the philosophy. But how does it actually play out in a real course, week to week? Let's get practical and look at the nuts and bolts of how this thing is built.
The whole thing really unfolds in 3 main stages. Right at the beginning, students set those big holistic goals. Then, all through the middle of the term, the instructor is giving constant, multi-layered feedback. And it all wraps up at the end, when students get to celebrate what they've learned and make their case for a final grade.
Let's zoom in on that first step, because it's pretty cool. The goal setting is way more than just academics. Students are actually encouraged to set goals for their personal well-being, things like getting enough sleep or exercising, and also for how they'll contribute to the classroom community. It's really about supporting the whole student, not just the academic part.
Now, if there's one thing that makes this whole system run, it's feedback. And there are 2 really distinct layers to it. Think of high-level feedback as the safety net. It's just about checking in, making sure a student is on track to pass, and stepping in early if they're struggling. But then you have the fine-grained feedback, and that's where the real learning happens. It's all about pushing their thinking, reinforcing their growth, and doing it all without ever stamping a good or bad label on anything.
And this all leads to the end of the term, which is where you see some amazing student agency. When it's time for them to justify their grade, students have submitted everything from choreographed dances and rap songs to poems and even virtual reality presentations. I mean, come on, it just completely redefines what it means to show what you know. All right, the process is definitely innovative, but does it actually work? Let's take a look at the data, which honestly gives us a really balanced and interesting picture of how this impacts students.
So when students were asked how this ungrading approach helped them learn, the benefits were super clear. The number one thing from over 1/3 of students was an improvement in the quality of their own work. Right behind that was the value of all that robust feedback and, not surprisingly, a big reduction in stress.
And the student quote just perfectly captures that data. They said, "Since I wasn't stressed, I actually was able to pour more into the thought of the work rather than trying to play the game of school." I mean, that's it. That's the whole philosophy right there in one sentence. But it's not a perfect system. It's important to look at the challenges too. Now, the good news is over 60% of students said there was no harm at all. But about 20% did say they felt some ambiguity in the process, and another 10% admitted that, they sometimes prioritized their other classes that had traditional grades.
And here's a student being really honest about that exact challenge. They said they prioritized other classes because they knew they were being graded. It highlights this real tension that exists when you're trying something new inside a system that still mostly runs on points.
So, this brings us to the million-dollar question.
what actually happens with the grades? This chart is wild. Get this. In nearly 78% of cases, students propose the exact same grade the instructor would have given them. And even more surprising, 16% of students actually proposed a lower grade than the instructor would have. Only a tiny 6% went higher.
And for those very few cases where there's a disagreement, the process is just really human. If a student proposes a lower grade, which often happens because of things going on in their life, the instructor raises it because the focus is on their learning, not their circumstances. If a student proposes a higher grade, a simple, respectful negotiation starts, and it's all grounded in the evidence and the student's own goals.
So when you see a system like this in action, you can't help but start thinking about your own approach, right? This whole project leaves us with some really important questions for any educator to think about.
First off, what are the 3 or 4 absolutely essential, non-negotiable things a student has to know or be able to do by the time they finish your course? What really, truly matters?
And then there's this question, which really challenges the way we've always done things. How many different ways can your students actually show you what they've learned? Does it have to be a test or an essay, or could it be something else entirely?
And all of that builds up to the final and, maybe the most fundamental question of all, one that gets right to the very heart of what education is supposed to be about.
What really counts as knowledge and learning? An approach like this one forces all of us to think beyond the syllabus, beyond the gradebook, and to really ask ourselves what we truly value in education. And that's a pretty powerful question to end on.